And we are live. This is your friendly neighborhood pastor, Damon Richardson, on UrbanLogia Live, coming to you this great Tuesday night to have a great conversation about context, talking about exegeting and contextualizing speakers and writers. And so we're going to have a great conversation tonight. I want to give a couple of shout outs here. Let's make sure we see who's on tonight. I see Rex was already in at 8:30. First one in the building. Blessings to you. Thank you again. I see Shotty Mills. Thank you for being in here and making sure that we keep the room moderated and all that you do. Blessings to you. I see JP Davis, Catherine Fortson, Anderson Shelton, Will M. Wonderful, wonderful, richly redeemed. Who else? Mr. Phil Fox. Blessings to you, Jonathan Monroe. So we'll give people a few more minutes to get on in. Orlando Santiago, my brother, blessings to you. How are you, Byron? I see you. I see you, Byron. Byron. All right, my brother. Blessings to you, King Charles. Wonderful. Amen. Good. So keep on coming in. And we will get started tonight. Great topic. It doesn't sound as catchy, but I think it is going to be a great topic tonight. Actually, I think we'll have a whole lot of fun with this. I see Evans Jean, Stephen Davis. Blessings, my brother Rick. All right, Marva Cummings, wonderful. Christine, I see you. 816, Apologia, JKM from Central America, Panama. All right, wonderful. Blessings to you, dear brother. All right, Chris Morton, I see you. Tiffany Hosea, Eric, I see you. Come on, keep on coming on in. We're up to 36. We're on YouTube only, so make sure that you like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. That will not only help us to be able to increase our support and increase those who are subscribing, our subscriber base. Just trying to think of the word, but it will also ensure that you know when we are going live. And Teresa, wonderful. Blessings to you. And good. So we'll get started here in just a minute. So we're going to be talking tonight about understanding. So you can see the title, Consider the Source, understanding, learning to contextualize speakers and writers, and why that's important in not only reading, but also in listening to speakers, how it can actually help you increase your understanding. So it's an aspect of hermeneutics that we actually use every single day. And which is interesting because typically we tend to think of hermeneutics as something that only applies to interpreting scripture. But in reality, we are using hermeneutical principles and exegetical practices every single day in communicating and engaging with different communicators, right? So these communicators are sometimes speakers that are using an oral approach to communication, and sometimes they're using a written, literary approach to communication. But in either case, we've got to be able to exegete what they are saying. But tonight, I not only want to talk about what they are saying. That's usually what we do. We tend to think of, how do I exegete the content? How do I break down the meaning of what they are saying? And tonight I want to go a little bit further because, for instance, when you look at books on hermeneutics or exegesis, you'll often get to what is called authorial intent. And that is, what was the intent of the author in the text? What were they trying to communicate? And that's good. We need to do that. What I'm talking about tonight is not just the intent of the author, as in maybe even what they are communicating beyond the text itself. But I'm talking about tonight the authorial context. That is considering who the author is and how the author's life has bearing on the text itself. Right? So that's more than just authorial intent. That's contextualizing the author. See, because once we can begin to engage in that level, then we can understand not just why, that is the modus operandi, the why the writer or the speaker is saying what they're saying, but we also have we have a way of also understanding why they are saying it the way they are saying it, right? So authorial intent may get behind the purpose of the writing. Why are they saying that? But authorial context might help us to get behind why are they even saying it that way. What is it in the author's life that shapes the text or the communication that gives meaning to it? So this is a consideration of the author's biography, the author's bios, their life. What is it in their life that actually shapes the meaning of this text, or that even shines light on the meaning of the text that I need to understand, right? So let me give you a brief breakdown of authorial context. It is another, and this is from George Mason University. Another term for this is biographical context. To say, excellent, wonderful, brother. That is to say that the authors write from not only their experiences, but it is to say that their lives also influence their work in some way. That does not mean, however, that the author identifies with the main character or even the narrator. Authorial context connects a particular work to the author's life. Did it come at the beginning of his or her career, in the middle, or at the end? Had the career so far been successful or not? In some cases, one book represents the entirety of the career. Consider the circumstances under which a work was written, what was going on in the author's life, what personal circumstances or specific events, either at the time of composition or in the past, motivated the author to write it. In short, how does this work fit into the author's life, and what influence did that life have on it, right? So this goes way beyond just authorial intent. This deals with contextualizing the author, and that is whether they are a literal writer or a speaker, right? So just to give some shape to the discussion, and this is going to be real good. This will be real good, I promise you. When I was in 4th grade, I had a teacher by the name of Mr. Dellett. And Mr. Dellett, you know, in the 4th grade, you're what? I guess 8 years old, 8, 9 years old. And yeah, 8, 9 years old. And you're still obviously very immature. We're still taking straws and, spit wads, and you know what I mean? You're still doing all that, plucking people on the back of on the ear, and, hiding your hand, acting like you didn't do it, and doing all kinds of crazy things. And obviously, this is a time when you're still also into tattling, and that is telling on somebody to get them in trouble, although you are engaged in the same behavior that they are engaged in, right? So that's tattling. And so one particular day, I was engaged in some foolishness in class, as was customary for Damon Richardson at 9 years old. Engaged in some foolishness in class, talking and disturbing other students who were trying to pay attention, and clowning around and goofing off. And one of my other buddies did something, and I didn't like it because they had bested me in the moment. And so I went to Mr. Dellett, walked up to his desk, and of course he was already aware that I was not on task. And I proceeded to tell on that friend of mine that he was disturbing me. And I'll never forget it. So Mr. Dellett says to me, now it's interesting that I can remember this because I don't really remember too many of the early grade school or grammar school stories. There's a few of them I remember, but not too many. But this one I remember. He proceeded to tell me, he said, Damon, he said, you have to consider the source. Now, he's talking to an 8 or 9-year-old, and he never took the time to explain what he meant by it. Not at all. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I was just as lost walking away as I was the moment I heard what he said. It wasn't until that I guess was probably in some years later in high school, that a situation occurred. And in that moment, I understood that consider the source means to go beyond simply what a person said and what a person did, and to consider who the saying and who the action or behavior came from. Because who that person is might shine more light on why they did it, why they said it. And so, for instance, if a person is a jerk, right? And they have been a jerk for many years, and certain things have happened in their lives that they just have it in for everybody. Well, when such a person says something that is jerkish, I guess if that's a word, if you already understand the context out of which the jerkish statement comes from, you're not really disappointed because you understand that the statement is a byproduct of the person, right? So you consider the source. That is, this statement comes from this person. This is the way this person is. This is how this person has behaved for quite a while. And so your expectation for the person to behave differently doesn't lend itself to frustration, because you're understanding or considering the source from whom the statement came. And so since you're not expecting them to say anything better than that, considering the source helps you to contextualize the statement itself and to have a greater understanding of why they would even say something like that in the first place, right? And so oftentimes, I'm going to tell you where we're going. I'm going to tell you where I'm going. See, when you don't, all of the other stuff is good. Socio, historical context, all that is good. Authorial intent, yes. Cultural context, literary context. What else we got? Grammatical context. All of that is good. But what I am saying is that the one other context that we often forget to consider is the author himself or herself. Because I can promise you that what they say, that is, whether it is verbal or in written form, comes not only from their experiences, but it comes from who they are. In some way, their life has shaped the way that they say it. We see it all the time in artists, and you see it, for instance, in the work of Van Gogh, Vincent Van Gogh. You see it in poetry, how a person pours their life. I don't know if you remember, one of my favorite movies is The Five Heartbeats. I love The Temptations, and I love The Five Heartbeats. And so there's a scene in which one of the two brothers, there's JT, and then there's his brother that played the piano, and for some reason I can't even remember his name right now. But nonetheless, there was a certain girl that he liked, and obviously he comes to find out later that his brother and this girl have a history, and so at some point they are accepting an award on stage, and he goes up to give his speech, and Duck, that's it, Duck, and so Duck goes up to give his speech, and he starts to say, that somebody told him one day. He said, you know, Duck, one day you're going to be a great writer when you have suffered enough. And he said, you know, I thought about that, and you know, and obviously he uses this as a moment to vent because he feels betrayed by his brother and his love interest, right? But that's an important thing that he says, that one day you'll be a great writer when you have suffered enough. Because what writers do and speakers is they often harness and utilize experiences from their life to fuel their passion, right? And to fuel their to fuel their passion in the way in which they pour themselves into the work. And you know the difference between work that is produced by somebody who has suffered in life, because it contains something extra, a greater oomph, right? It's coming from a deeper place inside of that person. And the more you understand about the author's context, the greater meaning the work and the message begins to take on, because you're realizing that this message is shaped by the author's context itself, right? This is really, really important. And sometimes we miss that. It's not just a matter of what was Luke's intention in Luke Acts, but it's how does Luke's life actually shape the text? What is it about Luke's life that gives shape to the way that he actually wrote, the way that he describes experiences that he is a witness to? And even when he's not a witness, when he is interviewing someone who was a witness, why does he say it in the way that he says it? Not just what does he say, not just the intention and the purpose behind it, but why does he say it in a certain way? What is it in Luke's life that actually brings shape and meaning to the text, that if we would understand that, we would get Luke better, right? I think one of the challenges in deciphering Paul exegetically, especially when we are looking at, for instance, Romans, I think Romans is probably one of his more ambiguous. There's a lot of great meaning that obviously you can pull from Paul in Romans, right? But there's a lot of ambiguity there as well. He leaves. I think Galatians is probably his clearest work. For me, I think Galatians is probably his clearest communication letter, followed by Ephesians and you know, so forth and so on. But my point is that I think part of the problem in the way that we don't get Paul is oftentimes we're not considering enough who Paul is, because we're constantly trying to figure out what is Paul's motive, what is his intent in saying this, what does Paul have in his mind, and that is important. But what about who Paul is? And sometimes we want to divorce Paul from literally who he actually is. Paul was not an ex-Jew. Paul was a Jew. Paul was also a Roman. So for instance, in the narrow historical context, one of the things that we consider in a narrow historical contextual analysis is the date of the work. We consider the place or the provenance, right? And you know, the historical setting, you know, what things gave rise to this particular letter or this particular book, so forth and so on. But we also consider who the author is, right? And sometimes we jump from who the author is. We give a little background and, oh, you know, Paul Tarsus, born the Roman, you know, his father was a Roman and so forth and so on. Roman citizen, his parents were Jews, he was a Benjamite, so forth and so on, educated under Gamaliel, blah, 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 blah. All that is good. But then we don't factor that into what Paul is saying. And so we kind of end up divorcing his life from the text. And I think the more we understand Paul, the more we understand why Paul says some things the way he says it. Because if we're not contextualizing Paul, like for instance, I hear people talk about Paul all the time. They say, yeah, Paul was a Jew converted to Christianity. Not true. Where did he ever convert to Christianity? Where's this conversion, this what you would call intra-faith conversion? That is to convert from one thing into another, completely independent ideological or theological construct, right? So where's that kind of dichotomy between the one thing and the other? First of all, for instance, when he is talking about not only in Acts, but even in Philippians, the phrase in the Greek is I'm a Phariseos. That is, I am a Pharisee. Not I was, not I used to be a Pharisee, but I am a Pharisee. So he continued to be. And how does that really shape the way that Paul thinks? How does being a Pharisee throughout his entire walk with God, upon receiving revelation, messianic revelation of Jesus Christ, how does who Paul is, how is that being shaped by the way that he, for instance, when he says that God had given him the ministry and the dispensation of grace, and it had been given to him to be he says, a wise master builder, right? And so how does that factor into the fact that the text has already told us, we've learned from Paul, not only in Romans, but we've also learned from Luke that Paul was a tent maker by trade. And that doesn't mean somebody who makes, tents in the same way that we would understand. But a tent was kind of like a temporary shelter, like a sukkah, but constructed in a more temporary, permanent way. So it's not a tent as in cloth kind of a deal. It was like temporary, permanent kind of housing, right? And so Paul was a builder. And you'll see how Paul then takes what he does as an aspect of his life in normal circumstances, and he conceives that Yahweh is using him in a similar way from a ministry standpoint. And so he imagines then that just as though he builds and constructs, that Yahweh has called him to be a wise master builder. That is an architect, to lay, not only an architect, but a general contractor, to receive the plans and to lay the foundation. And he says, and no foundation can anyone lay other than that which has been laid. So all of the others, you elders out there, be careful how you build on another man's foundation. And so he imagines from his own life's context, that his life is really mirroring his call, that he has been called by God to do something that mirrors aspects of his life, and that is to lay a foundation in the kingdom of God for the body of Christ through this revelation of the gospel of grace and the revelation of the Messiah himself. He is laying a foundation for others to build upon later. So you can see how understanding Paul's context factors into what Paul says and how he says it, because we understand a little bit more about Paul's life, right? Consider also when Jesus found when he selected the apostles and he called them to be his disciples, his followers first, that many of them were fishing at the time. That was a main part of their life. It was not only a part of their livelihood, but it was a part of their lives. It's how they identified themselves with others in the marketplace. I'm a fisher. I'm a fisherman, right? So that was a part of who they were. And so you'll notice that when Jesus calls them, he connects who they were to his purpose for their lives. And he says, in other words, whereas you have been fishermen, I am now calling you to be fishers of men. And so understanding that context helps you to understand a little bit more about their ministry and why they said things the way that they did, because who they were was never divorced from what they said. And the less you understand about an author's context, the greater risk you run in misunderstanding what an author said or speaker and why they even said it. And then you start running into either mischaracterizing or even essentially miscontextualizing this, completely misunderstanding it, completely missing it because you've missed a significant piece. I'll throw another bone at you here. So look, so when Jesus calls these apostles, these disciples, not only are they fishing, but specifically in John, it tells us that John and his brother, that they were mending their nets. They were mending their nets. This is what they were doing when Jesus rolled up on them. It was like, hey, follow me, right? Follow me. I'm about to pull out. Y'all with me or no? Follow me, right? Which was an invitation to become Talmudim, students of his. They understood what following entailed, and they were willing to do it. But at the time that he does it, some of them are mending their nets. So this was something that happened early in the morning after that night of having been out fishing. You would spread that net out, which was huge. These nets, these were not like cast net. These net were huge. They were, square yards wide and long. And so they would have to stretch it out, wash it off, and even repair it from tears that it had received in order to be able to use it again. If they did not do that and it dry out, then it would rot, right? So this was a process that they did all the time. But mending the net was a significant aspect of it. And so then when we start thinking about John, who was mending the net, it's significant because who he was and what he was doing factored into how God uses him throughout throughout his ministry. And so it's interesting that not only is he the last of the surviving apostles, but whereas by the end of the first century, groups like the Gnostics and many other the Docetists and many other philosophies and false ideas were beginning to creep in the church in fulfillment to what Paul told the elders at Miletus, that after my departure, well, in fulfillment to that, many of these people did come in. And what do we see in John's writing, not only in his letters, but we also see it, of course, in the Revelation. We see John apologetically mending those tears in the net, defending the faith, because he sees where the infiltration of many of these teachings have created rifts and tears and have brought even some confusion. And, in other words, it is torn at the fabric of some people's faith. And there's John in his writing, mending the net. And so you'll see how contextualizing the writer and the speaker also helps us to understand where they're coming from when they are writing and when they are speaking. I hope I'm being clear, because I'm trying to be redundant to kind of set the whole conversation up. So this is really, really important aspect. And again, it's not just the speaker, it's also the writer, because at the end of the day, while it is important for them to exegete their audience, right? So speakers and writers are exegeting their audience. They're writing in such a way to where they are framing their statement because of the needs, the social context of their audience, and they're considering all of that. And so they are exegeting, as it were, their audience. And that's important, because you got to know who you're talking to so that you can understand how to say a thing, why to say a thing, when to say a thing, and all of that good stuff. So you can see this reciprocation. Speakers and writers are often contextualizing their audiences, right? For a writer, their audience may be, who am I intending this for? Now, they can't help that other folk read it, but they do have in mind who they think their work is for, the intended demographic, the intended audience. This is the audience that is going to best get what I am communicating here, right? So that's that piece. But we often never, and so as a result of that, we often never understand that it is also important for the audience to turn around and exegete or contextualize the speakers. That's why it works so well when a pastor is at a particular church. That's why certain dynamics exist between a pastor and congregation that doesn't exist between a guest speaker and the same audience. Because the guest speaker may be really hitting and popping and really working that text, and all that is good, and they're receiving it, and all that is wonderful. But without the authorial context, there is a dynamic missing that causes them to not be able to get certain nuances that the author was putting out, that it takes knowing him or her, or knowing about him or her, to be able to connect those dots. But congregations and their pastor, because they know them, it's not just that they get up and preach good every Sunday. It is because what you know about them also enables you to connect better with what they are saying and how they are saying it, without them having to explain to you that I said it this way for a reason, right? And so okay, let me give you some other examples, right? So let's just say, all right, we're just talking about racism, right? And you know, some of our other brothers and sisters around the world, regardless of what their ethnicity is, they may get it, whether they are Asian or whatever it is, whether they're white or whatever, they might absolutely get it. But then there's a larger segment of people who don't get it. And no matter how much you explain to them about historical context and all that other stuff, they just don't get it, right? They just don't understand. Maybe they're not trying to understand. I don't know what it is. But at the end of the day, when you say certain things, you've got to constantly qualify and break it down and this, that, and the other, and all this other stuff. And let me help you understand this, that, and the other. And then somebody else can come along. Never met that person ever in life, never seen their face before, but they are Black. And you can communicate the same exact thing to them. And they get it. They understand. There's no need for disclaimers. There's no need for qualifying any further what you're saying. They automatically get it because they understand your context. And so they understand not only what you are saying, they understand why you're saying it. They understand the way in which you are saying it. They understand that your passion is not necessarily aggression, that it literally comes from a particular place of pain and lament and concern. And it's all interwoven in there, that this person, because they get you as a context, they get what you are saying. And because the other person hasn't taken the time to get you as a context, they don't get any of it. And what do? They walk away, they walk away with all kinds of, oh man, Richardson's falling for CRT now, and all kinds of other dumb stuff. Right? And that's the risk we run when we don't learn how to contextualize who we're talking to. So I'll say this. And so for instance, I'm just popped up out of a vacuum. Just one day, boom, here I am, and now I'm on social media. Well, prior to social media, I've been doing ministry for 20 plus years. You see what I mean? And so there's an entire context to me in ministry. There's an entire context to me doing apologetics. There's an entire spiritual and theological context that I come from and through that brings me all here to this place. There are a number of experiences, right? And so when I'm on, all of that is coming to bear. So, let me get a little closer and tell you, let me come closer to the screen and say this. And, and let me say it like this, and I'm doing all this. And folk who don't know any of the context, they're looking in like, this guy, who does he think he is? Why is he so angry all the time? Why is he talking like that? Right? And so it's easy then for a person to listen, understand none of the context, and miss out on not only what's being said, but why it's even being said, the way it's being said, because they haven't considered the source. They haven't understood what goes into the communication from the person's life that shapes the meaning of the communication itself. When people do that, they run the risk of misjudging you, completely misunderstanding what you're saying, how you were saying it, why you're saying it, and all of that, because they haven't taken time to try and engage with who is the speaker, right? What has happened in their life, perhaps, that has shaped the way that they bring about this message? What is it in their life that comes to bear upon the message itself? You understand what I'm saying? So this is really, really important, because it's one thing to have an expectation of writers and speakers to always do the bending. Consider your audience. Watch your tone. Don't say it like this. Don't say it like that. And all those things are helpful. They're good. We do that because obviously we have concern for being obviously more effective and cutting down on static in the communication, right? In the communication model, there is the sender, there is the message, there is the means through which the message comes, and then there is the receiver. Somewhere in between that, there may be distortion, right? And sometimes how we say a thing might increase distortion. So we want to be careful about watching our tone, watching our mannerism, and all that. Well, there's only so much of that we can do. There's only so much of that we can do without intrinsically changing who we are and compromising what our own context contributes to how we are saying it, why we're saying it, and what we are saying. So we don't want to compromise that, because so much of that is related to who we are, right? So you can't come here and expect me to sound like Chuck Swindoll or William Lane Craig, right? Because my experiences and who I am shapes how I say things and what I say and my approach to dealing with certain issues, right? And so if you don't take any of that in consideration, you're just here for the information, but your expectation is that I should deliver it in a way that meets a certain standard that you have had presuppositionally. You are going to be super disappointed, and it's likely that you're going to walk away from one of these nights thinking Richardson is the most arrogant dude I have ever met. What is up with this cat? Why is he always so, he's always on 100, always cranked up, always seeming angry, whatever it is. And you have not contextualized me as the problem. You have not come to the communication exegetically considering who is this author and what is it about the author's life that makes the way the communication comes across what it is. You see what I mean? And so what ends up happening is that some folk, they walk away with all kinds of thoughts and this, that, and the other. And listen, and I can't control any of that. What I can say is this: I can only do so much bending, and I can only be so flexible. But at a certain point, all speakers and authors or writers have to invite you to contextualize them, to learn of them. That's what Jesus said. Take my yoke, my teachings upon you. That's what a yoke was in rabbinic sense. But then he says, and learn of me. Not just learn what I am teaching, but learn of me, because learning of me is the key to learning more about my teaching. See that? So Contextualizing the speaker is significant, or else you run the risk of doing some other things and being disappointed, being angry, casting aspersions and judgment and all kinds of stuff because you have not done your part in approaching. You've attempted to divorce the work from the worker. And to not even consider who they are. I'm just going to look at what they said and I'm going to just try and break it down the best way I can. Well, you're not going to be able to go but so far without understanding who they are. So it's more than just authorial intent. It's authorial context. Who is this person talking to us? Right? And so that can really help all of us from a communication standpoint. Listen, I deal with folk all the time that'll read something that I post, right? And let's say 300-400 people like it, and another 250 folk comment. Of the 250 folk, at least 243 are going to get it, and they're going to be like, "Oh man, I know exactly what you're saying, amen," or whatever, something like that. There's going to be about 7 of them, though, that are going to come in certain ways. Here's the way one of them will come. One of them will come and be like, "Oh man, I disagree. I disagree with what you were saying." Now, my first thing is disagree. Why would you disagree with that? Like, that is like open and shut. That's not like even opinion. That's like, that is what it is. There's no room for disagreement in that, because I'm just literally restating in a Damon way what the text has said. But the problem is not that they're disagreeing. The problem is that they are disagreeing with what they think you were saying. And isn't it better when you have access to who said it, to not only consider who said it and why they said it in a certain way, but to also consider that perhaps they haven't said anything wrong to which you should be disagreeing with. Perhaps you just misunderstood what they said. So a better way to approach that is not jumping in with a disagreement, but asking a clarifying question, such as, if I'm understanding you correctly, are you saying this and that? Now that way, I don't assume that you got me all wrong, and you don't assume that I have it all wrong. You're just seeking clarification. You haven't accused me of being wrong, and I haven't accused you of prejudging my statement or getting it all wrong. You're just, if I'm, because there is that possibility that I might be totally missing it. If I'm understanding you correctly, are you saying, to which I would be able to say, or you would be able to say, if you are the writer or the speaker, therein is the miscommunication. What you thought I was saying was this, but what I really was saying was that. But I can understand how you might be thinking that because of this, but no, that's not what I was saying. And then they'll be like, "Oh, thanks for clearing that up. I got you, appreciate you." And now we have gotten communication. There was some distortion in the message, but oftentimes it involves understanding and contextualizing the author, right? And so a speaker or an author can say certain things, and remember the 243, because they deal with you, they're like, that's a classic Richardson way of saying it, and they don't even think twice about it. But that group of 7, they don't have any of that context to go with, and so they're just dealing with what they think you were saying in a very literal way, and they're dealing with the literal way that you're presenting it, and they're just getting it all wrong, right? So classic example, when I did the the video with Polite, got him on the line, he's talking this, that, and the other, and I'm going through all that stuff. Is this your king? Is this, and all this other stuff? And don't debate a doe, debate a buck. And I'm doing all this stuff. And people were listening, and there were a whole lot of people. That's what I'm talking about. People need to see Christians standing there, blah, 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 rah, rah, and people were getting it. And then there were people like, oh man, there was a whole lot of arrogance in the way he was saying it and his tone and all this other stuff. And it's not a real Christian way of coming across. And, there's some people who were, obviously sincerely concerned too. I'm not even coming against them. I mean, some people had serious concern for, oh man, you got to be careful how you put yourself out there. People can misread and this, that, and the other. And granted, anybody that ever puts anything out there runs the risk of being misread, right? So why do we put it out there anyway? Because I run a greater risk of being understood than misread. I'll take the hit on the 3% that misunderstand me in order to be able to be understood by the 97%, right? And so why did 97% of the people understand what was going on? Because they also understood contextually where I'm coming from, right? What shaped me? What shaped my thinking? What shaped my approach? What shaped that, right? And then also, what is the author's context itself? And so if you understand anything about battle rap, you know that this is not just hip hop. This is a subgenre of hip hop. These guys are spitting in each other's face, and you almost think they're going to fight, but they are not. That's the way they are communicating in that genre. That's not necessarily a reflection on who they are. It is the way that they are. I should say, it is a reflection of who they are. It's not necessarily a reflection of a certain ill intent or meaning. And so if you're reading that into it, you're missing the point that this is coming out because of who the person is and because of the context that they're dealing with. You don't take that into consideration, you think a whole lot of other things. So I did another video talking about the tradition of ridicule and shade and a number of other kind of things, mockery in the biblical tradition, and showing how there's an entire biblical tradition of doing this in very cultural ways, right? But it also takes understanding who the people are who employ that kind of mockery and shade and ridicule, because they're not only using that, it's coming from a place of who they are. So when Jesus tells Herod, when he tells these servants of his, go tell that fox Herod, this is coming from who Jesus is. So why is Jesus saying that? Because a fox was not just a sly, crafty animal. That's what we mean by fox. But what Jesus meant by fox and what they understood by fox is a small animal that thinks that they're more ferocious and more powerful than what they really are. So this is Jesus's way of saying, go tell Herod that he doesn't have as much power as he thinks he has. And he certainly doesn't have power over me. So it's not just what Jesus said. It's who Jesus is that gives shape to that statement. Take that same statement and somebody else say it, and it's a different statement, right? It comes across in an entirely different way. And so we've got to start taking time to contextualize who's saying what, so that we can understand a little bit better about what they're saying, why they're saying it, and how it's even coming across. Because it may not necessarily be how it appears to you. It appears a certain way to untrained ears. It's like all the people, you see it all the time. There's these folks who make all these memes about what they think the Bible is saying. And then you're like, the only reason why, it's like a person is saying, I don't believe that God knows all things, because I was reading there in Genesis, it's like, it repented God that he had made man. So obviously he became disappointed because he had learned that men were essentially a hopeless group of people, right? But watch this. Reading about what God said there involves more than just what's said there. It involves understanding that the way that this statement was made was in a literary style called anthropomorphism. So that does teach me something about God, but it uses not really anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism would be like the hands of the Lord, the eyes of the Lord. It's called anthropopathism. That is the emotions of God, right? And so it uses essentially human emotion in order to be able to describe something about God's attitude towards something that really goes beyond our full ability to comprehend. So it creates a bridge between what's being communicated and what we understand. So by creating that bridge, it uses human passion, human emotion in order to kind of bridge that gap, in order to close that gap in, right? And so it's not really saying that God is now sorry that because suddenly he has realized after learning that people are just all jacked up, and now shucks, I should have never made these, miserable people. I should have never made them. He's not coming to some point of realization that humans are all jacked up. That's not what the text is saying. But when we understand God in scripture, we realize that God is all knowing. We realize some things about God that inform that text, that help us to understand that this is the writer's way of expressing God's disappointment, God's anger with man's behavior, not necessarily his disappointment with the fact that men have just gone in a way that I was not expecting, right? So understanding that literary way of communicating it and understanding more about God, we bring that into the text and we're like, that's not what the text is saying, right? And it really helps us to inform our understanding of the real meaning of the text, so that we don't walk away thinking that God is not omniscient, that that he's not sovereign and he's not in control. That's not what the text is communicating. And so notice, knowing about God helps us to understand text about God that seem to be communicating something other than what it is. And that seem and the way things appear to me, that can jack you up, because things are not always what they appear, right? You see what I mean? And so you got to go beyond that veneer. You got to go beyond that veneer. Richardson sounds angry. Maybe that's not anger, though. Maybe that's something deeper and more significant than what it appears to be. You see what I'm saying? I'm using myself as an example, but I hope you get what I'm saying. So I'm essentially done. I'm going to go, as I normally do, to the comment section, do some quick Q&A so that I can answer some questions regarding the topic tonight. There it is, that video, Sarcasm, Mockery, and Shade in the Biblical Tradition. Check that out, because that will really help to contextualize me and my communication in light of a biblical tradition. Is, oh, that was really more biblical than what I understood. I thought you were getting out of character. I thought you was getting beside yourself. No. You thought, and that's because you didn't bring context to me, right? You didn't contextualize me. You didn't frame who I am and what I'm saying in a particular context that illuminated your understanding. You thought something else. That's almost like eisegesis. You're imposing a meaning on me and on what I said that's not inherent in who I am and what I actually said. So you see how we can actually be eisegetical with people? Just like we are exegeting text, we need to exegete who said it. We need to be contextual we need to contextualize who they are in as best as we could, with as much information as we have to help us understand the communication all the way around. So let's go to, if you've got questions, let's go now to the comment section. I want to be able to hear from you. Put question in front of your question so that I can quickly pick out that it is a question. So here's a statement here. Some modern day Christians would probably inbox Jesus too with their concerns for when he called the woman a dog, although contextually it has a different meaning than our meaning for the word. That's very true. That is very true. And so not only does his statement carry a contextualized meaning, why he would say it is also contextual to who he is. He said that I have come. So who is the I when he says I have come? Well, I as the Messiah. Obviously, I have been sent first to the lost sheep of Israel. So understanding who Jesus is as Messiah helps us to understand why he would say that, because this is his way of saying that I'm gonna bless you. But by priority, I've actually been sent first to the lost house of Israel. Right? And so Jesus is prioritizing that his immediate ministry was to Jews and then ultimately to everybody. This is why Paul says that I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It's the power of God unto salvation to all who believe, to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. So understanding who Jesus is as Messiah helps us to also understand that his statement indicates an aspect of his mission and his concern, that his immediate and his prima concern was first for Israel and then ultimately for the Gentile, right? So his statement comes out of his messianic identity and his mission. You see what I mean? So it's understanding his messianic identity and his mission that helps us to really contextualize what he said to this woman. But that is exactly right. And if you don't do that, you'll be up there preaching or telling somebody, yeah, there was a time that Jesus insulted this woman, called her a dog. Can you believe that? Called her a dog, you know? And but that's not what he did. You see, so that's a really, really good point. Yeah, so let's see. Here's a question here. Contextualizing an omniscient God, how can he deal with man in real time when he knew? But see, that's just the point. The point is that language is not wholly adequate to express everything that there is to know about God. And so human writers are challenged to be able to communicate what God has revealed to them from their own historical, social, and literary context and cultural context. And in that, there's going to be some breakdown in that. So one of the ways in which they do that is to create these anthropomorph, that is ascribing to God human form and ascribing to God human emotion or passion. Does that actually communicate a one-to-one correlation between God and man? No, it's just a bridge for us understanding that somehow in the divine economy of things, God is angry with human behavior. And as much as we also know from biblical text that God is omniscient, that he is all powerful, and all of these different things, we hold what we know about God in tension, even when it seems to be running parallel, not necessarily intersecting in any kind of way, but parallel. Like, how could this be true and that be true? And they're running on two parallel streams. Where's the intersection? Well, that's why we have to hold these things in tension, because we have to understand also the inadequacy of human language to fully help us to be able to understand things about God that we can't. But what God really wants us to know does come across in the most clearest, or in the clearest, most revelatory language. And those are the things that we really need to ensure from a fundamental and foundational standpoint, that we embrace, that we believe, that we not only apprehend it, but that we comprehend it. We wrap our minds around what God has communicated about himself. So that's literally just the point. That's a great question. So, okay. Is that the same one? There you go. Okay, so you just asked the question twice. Good deal. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, here we go. should we use this same contextual lens when listening to or hearing a message from those with shaky, shady theologies? Well, one of the things that I would say is that there's a yes and no to that. Number one, I would say we shouldn't even be listening to people with bad theology. That's number one, right? And but there is a sense in which the answer is yes. So for instance, let me just help you to understand what I'm saying. Not that we should be listening to them anyway, but when we, for instance, we understand what gave rise to a Reverend Ike, what gave rise to a Dallas Moore, or a Sweet Daddy Grace, a Father Divine, that would lead them in the direction of, what happened to Jim Jones that would make him say the things that he said. That is for a certain consideration to contextualize not only who they ultimately became, but why they ultimately did what they did. There's a certain sense in which that can be helpful, but not from the standpoint of submitting ourselves to listening to their teaching. Here's an interesting thing about that, and I'm glad, JP, that you mentioned that. H.B. Charles put up a picture that blew me away the other day. I don't know if you guys seen it. Blew me away. So H.B. Charles Jr., his father pastored this historical Baptist church in Los Angeles. And when his father died, H.B. Jr. became the pastor at 16 years old, right? But long before that, now this is a historical Black Baptist church in Los Angeles. And so, and HB is his name. It's not even initials. That's his actual name. That's another thing that I didn't know. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. His dad's name was HB, and that was his name. But he put up a picture. I'm getting way off track, but he put up a picture the other day of his dad standing with two well-known ministers. I can't remember the name of the other minister, but one of them was Fred Price. Fred Price was an associate minister under his dad. And so immediately I started thinking, well, so Fred Price actually comes from a biblically orthodox, a theologically conservative church and background. That just made me want to look further and say, what is it? What happened in Fred Price's life that ultimately attracted him to the teachings of Kenneth Hagin? Right? So it just made me want to kind of contextualize, what was it that caused him to lose attraction and lose obviously faith in sound theology and feel like high view of scripture and sound biblical doctrine is inadequate. And there was something about this particular message over here that became more attractive to him. When I saw that picture, it made me want to know what happened in his life. What was it? What is it about the author or the speaker's life that, that brings shape to his particular message? Obviously, a message that he borrowed from another teacher and began to own it and preach it himself. Well, that's significant. I'm really interested if there's any possible way in knowing is that what happened? Where was that shift? What caused him to turn away from sound doctrine towards heterodoxy and even heresy? You see, so I thought that was really considerate, significant rather, and something to consider that might even help to kind of answer your question there. Great question. Let me see. I skipped one. Any thoughts on N.T. Wright's biography on Paul? Seems relevant to the conversation and getting to better understand him. Yeah, so I would say, yeah. So what you're referring to is what they call NPP, New Perspective on Paul, NPP, right? So here's the thing, though, and this is what I was actually saying in my last live when I was dealing with what was the last live about? I don't know why I'm forgetting so many things tonight. I was talking about, it was on Psalm 82, and it was gods or men, and obviously people were asking questions because they were more influenced by Heiser, and that's fine. Heiser's a great teacher and Old Testament theologian, so forth and so on. The problem, though, is that New Perspective on Paul is, I think it is a step in the right direction. In other words, we have to consider some things about Paul in order to. So it's what I'm talking about. We just have to be careful that we are carte blanche embracing and swallowing an entire perspective. Because we also have to keep in mind, in as much as it is enjoining us to consider Paul's perspective, that there is a great deal of NPP that is not Paul's perspective. It's Wright's perspective, and it's his predecessor's perspective. It's their theory on how we need to do it. And sometimes people are just not nuanced enough in the works that they are engaging in such a way that they can appreciate what a person is saying, what they bring, without embracing everything that they say. And then we just become little cult followers, right? And N.T. Wright says some great things. I don't have to agree with everything that N.T. Wright says, right? I don't agree with everything that N.T. Wright says, but neither would N.T. Wright agree with everything that I say. I don't agree with everything that Heiser says, but neither would he. Like, nobody has that expectation. Sometimes we latch on to a certain perspective and a certain approach of a particular scholar or theologian, and because we trust that theologian and that scholar's expertise, we feel like embracing everything that they say, and it just becomes ours. And what I've been trying to encourage people to do is be more nuanced, right? And you know, don't embrace everything. Question everything. Don't embrace everything. Question everything. Nobody's got it right about every single thing. And we're not even talking about essentials now. We're just talking about, other ideas and truths and other things that are discussed. Nobody has it right about everything as it relates to that, right? So I think NPP is a step in the right direction in terms of doing that. But it doesn't make every aspect of NPP something that is Paul's perspective. How much of that is Wright's perspective? That's how I approach things like that. So that I am pulling out of NPP those things that I can find filtered through scripture that I find faithfully communicated there, and then add that to my framework without becoming part of, without, in other words, embracing all of NPP. NPP is a construct, right? Inside of every construct, there are truths and things that can be gleaned and pulled out and made part of a larger framework. I would prefer to do that because there's just no honest way that I can embrace an entire construct and then read scripture with honest eyes, because now I have elected to read scripture through the lens of that construct, which means that I have presumptuously and presuppositionally accepted every aspect of that construct as being true. Therefore, when I am reading scripture, I am not reading scripture. I'm really reading it through that lens. So it is the lens that is truer to me than the text, right? And that's a problem. That's a problem, right? So, but in terms of what I am saying tonight, it might help to understand a little bit more about Wright in terms of why he has arrived at some of his perspective on Paul. Don't let Wright sell you off on Paul's perspective without you investigating Wright's perspective. on Paul and where that came from, and how much of Wright's own life factors into that in the same way we do Bart Ehrman. See what I mean? See? Good. What else do we have? Yes, indeed. Please support this channel by hitting the thumbs up, subscribe, become a member of UrbanLogia. We love your support, and you are helping not only our subscriber numbers go up, but you're also helping us to be able to reach all of our budget and financial goals, to be able to, we are literally, I promise you, and I keep saying it every single time you hear me, but if you can only see Exegesis 1 and 4th century church history and what has been done to it, it's been totally reshot. And when you see it, it blew me away. So we're going to be uploading it here. We got a couple of little extra steps on the back end. We're going to be uploading it here. I'm praying that by next week, it will be uploaded. When you see it, it's going to blow you away. But it's money that's helping us to be able to do that. And again, our goal is to be able to put 20 of those videos out by the end of the year. And they're going to be a mixed consortium of videos, some apologetic, some church history, some theology. Again, it's going to be a mixture of a number of different things, but it is going to really help you to be able to grow in your faith and understanding. It's a seminar-based course, so it doesn't require you to enroll and all this other stuff. 8 weeks and 16 weeks. It's delivered in seminar format, so it's intensive. It's going to be a whole lot of information being delivered in a lecture style that you can watch over and over and over and over, and you'll be able to follow along with the visuals on screen, all that other stuff. But should you ever go to seminary, you'll arrive in the seminary class most likely with more information than what most people who come. I've been in seminary classes with people who didn't know some of the stories in Genesis, had never even read it before, didn't know some of the gospel narratives. As the people go to seminary, this is like a graduate program. They could have had their degree in mathematics and decided to go into theology, never even literally knowing nothing about it. I want to make sure that whatever you use, whatever you do with it, whether it's from a ministry standpoint, whether you want to further augment your education, grow in your understanding personally as a believer, I just want to make sure that supplementally it helps to fill in those knowledge gaps and help to bring transformation to your life and edification to your life as well. So definitely, please help us in that way. Pastor Troy, rhetorical devices are meant to portray as much meaning as the words themselves. Good. Oftentimes, the rhetorical devices give the words spoken meanings. That's exactly right. And so keep in mind that words really don't have meaning other than what is ascribed to them. So in other words, people code words with meaning, but words don't have inherent meaning. Words are really sounds. They are syllables that we code and give meaning to. So the word itself doesn't carry the meaning. The meaning is a matter of how it is coded, how it is decoded, because the speaker codes it, the hearer decodes it in context. And so the way that the writer, and how do they know how to decode it? Well, the writer or the speaker has given them contextual clues. How are they using this word? That's usage, right? So these are important, but this is important with anybody speaking or writing, is what I'm saying, right? So that really helps. Absolutely. Here's how to become a member of UrbanLogia. There is the YouTube link /C/UrbanLogia Ministries /join. Consider becoming a member, and we just thank you in advance. Let's see what else we have. There it is. Pre-order these shirts. These shirts are also helping us. The pre-orders are actually going to start being fulfilled, I believe, next week. But our goal was to sell 200 of those 2-packs. So there is Who Taught You, and then there is the 2-pack or the 2-pack shirt, which is kind of just a reworked acronym for TULIP, right? So definitely help us out there with, and if you're like, oh, you know, I ain't into Reformed theology, blah, blah, blah. All right, well, just get the who taught you. That's all. We sell that one individually as well. Get that who taught you, and that will help us out. That will help us out. Any other questions? Any other questions? Anybody else? New member. We appreciate you, Amber. Thank you so much for becoming one of the UrbanLogia YouTube members. We really appreciate you. Let's see. Here's a question. JJ, can we apply context of speaker and writer as well to theologians who have a strict view of women speaking? And I mean, again, it's regardless of what they are saying. It's not so much of what they are saying, it's who's saying it, right? So yeah, so it's not particular to what they always believe. And mind you, I'm talking about people who, from a orthodox standpoint, already believe in an orthodox way. This is true of everybody, right? But it's not so much particular to their view, but an understanding who they are and how who they are shapes their view, right? So sometimes, again, there are people who believe that way because their church believed that way. That's all they were ever exposed to. And they heard convincing arguments from their church. That's it. They never engaged outside of that. They felt like, well, what my church taught me was right. That's it. So they've never been open to. So why they would have a strict view of women speaking in church sometimes is nothing more other than that's what they learned in their church, and lack of exposure outside of that particular context. And then there might be some other dynamics in there. Sometimes people come from churches where their pastor's words hold more authority than scripture itself. So if their pastor taught it, it's more Bible to them than what the Bible, and you might even be able to say, well, let me help you understand, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. And they're looking at you like you got a third eye in the middle of your forehead, like you trying to teach them about, decalcifying their pineal gland or something like that. And they're looking at you like you're crazy because all they're hearing is you trying to tell me my pastor is wrong. Do you know what I mean? Because in their thinking, they've never considered anything outside of their pastor being right and their church being right. And they've not, and that's always been right, and it always will be right in their mind. And so people pass along what they've been taught without sometimes consideration for where did this come from? Like, or why do we even believe it? Why do we teach it? Maybe why did my pastor teach it? Right? And you just never know. So I could see how you would ask that question, but it applies to everything, though, is my point. We just have to learn how to be more contextual to speakers and writers, at least in understanding what brings them to where they are, so that we can get it a little better. You understand what I'm saying? So yeah. Good question, though. Great question. Absolutely. Love to hear from you. info@urbanlogia.org. Questions, request for speaking engagements as well. Go also to urbanlogia.org, and there is a speakers request page as well. But let us hear from you. Let us hear from you how this ministry is being a blessing. Write us at info@urbanlogia.org. We'll definitely trade. Thank you so much, first of all, and we'll definitely try to have that fixed. I know there was some problems with the embedded link behind the donate button that hopefully we can get that resolved tonight. But thank you. I appreciate your support of our ministry. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Absolutely. Thank you. Any other questions? I don't know. I don't know. I have been hearing some things that may be a little bit encouraging. The concern there is still the foundation, right? Because again, if a person adds sound doctrine on top of bad theology and bad doctrine, you almost think, well, the one will weed out the other. No. The one has to be deconstructed. Or remember Jesus's parable of the houses. He wasn't concerned so much with the material. Notice the parable of the two houses. It wasn't how the houses were constructed. It could have been both built the same way, both brick, right? So the construction of the house might have been fine. Jesus was talking about why one house is weaker than the other based on the foundation of it. Not everything else on top of that. I mean, you can have a brick house, but if it is built on sand, doesn't matter if it's a brick house. When the floods come, that house is in trouble, right? And so sometimes people never get rid of their bad theological foundation and start adding some truth on top of that. That seems good, but it's not, because the foundation is still bad. And ultimately what the foundation does, it starts informing the truth that they are getting. And so it starts perverting that truth. And so ultimately then even those truths that they're trying to stand up on top of this bad theological foundation, ultimately that starts to get warped and mishandled. You see what I mean? So I don't know too much about where the son is going. I've heard some things. My concern, though, is that it's whether or not he's abandoned his father's teaching. His father's teaching was heresy, straight up. And he's not some prince or general of the faith and all this other stuff. He taught heresy. You don't get a crown. You don't go from labor to reward for teaching heresy for years and years and years. You don't have your rest. Take your rest, sir. You don't get to take your rest in the Lord for teaching heresy. You know what I'm saying? That kind of a thing. So, there are people who might object to that, but I encourage you to go back and look at the corpus of his teaching against Scripture and see that what I'm saying is true. You see, so good question. Good question. Do you think Black preachers get more flack for their passionate preaching teaching than white preachers do? Okay, wow, this is a really, really interesting question. I'm not sure though how to answer it in total, because I don't always really hear that flack. So I'm not sure that that's true, that they get more flack. I will say this, that oftentimes Black preaching is held up against the standard of white preaching. I will say that. But that's usually along the lines of the expository preaching method. And then sometimes, of course, Black preachers do the celebratory thing, the hooping thing, and this, that, and the other. We understand the cultural context out of which celebration comes. They may not. So they may, and there it is. You see, again, they may not get the context of the Black preacher. So they don't get the methodology and the approach that we're taking to the celebratory moment. So it's a lot of what I'm saying there that comes to bear in that. There are some white preachers that are really, really, really passionate as well. They may come across differently in their delivery, but nonetheless, none. And what you're saying may be true. I just don't know if it's the case that Black preachers would get more flack, because I've never heard the flack. But I do understand what you're saying from the standpoint that white approaches to preaching and methods of preaching is often seen in a more standardized, normatized way, and Black preaching is usually held up against that, right? And it may not necessarily be from a flack standpoint as much as white evangelicals have just learned to make white approaches to doing things culturally orthodox. So sometimes they have an issue with what orthodoxy actually is. They cross over from biblical orthodoxy into cultural orthodoxy. And so then everything is right when it's done the way we do it. And sometimes that is a problem in evangelicalism. It just is. And so I can see how what you're saying might be true in that light. And I've probably only heard Washer maybe 2 times, maybe. R.C. Sproul is very passionate in his preaching, very passionate in his preaching. You know, there's quite a number of white preachers that, you know, that I've heard over the years that the delivery is different, but there's as much passion. I don't care for passionless preaching. You know, even the Greeks understood 3 important elements to rhetoric. One was pathos. That was the passion in which you put into what you were saying. There was another one that was ethos, and that was the ethical credibility behind use. You know, what makes this person an expert? What makes them know what they're talking about? That was the ethos. And then it was the logos, and that is to consider what the person is saying itself, the content. What are they communicating? That was the logos, right? But it was those 3 things. But the pathos was really important to Greeks and rhetoric. Is that you gotta passionately communicate that logos. You see, and you know. I don't know why so many people have gotten away from that, but you know, I think that's a real important aspect of communication. Yes, these are some great questions. Has the Bible changed? What I mean is how one interprets the Bible versus the text used to describe a meaning. I'm not understanding your question. I can at least answer the first part. No, the Bible has not changed. It has not changed. It's the same communication that it's always been, which is why we're saying we need exegetical approaches to better understand how other people communicated at another time. That information is taken for granted in the text because they're already talking to people from within their socio-cultural, historical, and grammatical context. So they assume that those people know what they're talking about. They didn't have us in mind, so they don't assume that you will understand their idioms. They did assume that the people that they were talking to would, right? So the more we understand those things, then the more we understand the way in which the Bible was actually communicated, right? So the Bible hasn't changed. It's you know, so I can answer that part of it. I don't understand the second part about how one interprets the Bible versus the text used to describe a meaning. And but I'll be glad to answer that second part again if you can kind of rephrase that in a way that will help me understand it. Wonderful. Yes. All right. Yes, come on, get those likes up. We those thumbs up actually do help to increase the visibility of these videos. And hit that thumbs up, hit the like, hit subscribe, all that good stuff, and hit that notification bell. But absolutely. Thank you, Audley. Let's see, what else do we have? How can we explain context to those who have been tainted by false teachers who try to destroy the concept of faith altogether? And should we even try, since all men have not faith? Yeah, this is a tough question. It took a little turn here towards the end. That's challenging for me. So let me try to see if I understand the first part. How can we explain context to those who have been tainted by false teachers. Well, that's part of the problem is that false teachers are effective in their teaching because they divorce the teaching from context. So it's just important to help people that we're talking to understand why context is even important in the first place. And we can provide for them even analogies and examples from, our contemporary time to do that. Right. So, so you remember Dave Chappelle? Remember Dave Chappelle, the Chappelle show. And you remember they did that skit and it was Charlie Murphy telling these tales about how they went to Rick James's house and all this other stuff, him and his brother Eddie. And it's interesting that Eddie Murphy literally confirmed that these stories were actually true. Like they actually did happen. Like as Charlie Murphy was just a great storyteller. And but these things really happen. And he had that famous thing, Rick James, talking about cocaine is a, heck of a drug and this, that, and the other. And I'm Rick James, B, and so one time Rick James was at an award show, like people didn't even recognize Rick James because he had looked so different from the last time we've seen him. Some people did recognize him and some people just, didn't recognize him at all. But obviously, he knew about the Chappelle show and the skits, this, that, and the other. But not everybody had seen the Chappelle show and didn't see the skits. And so I was told that somebody up in the audience, I was told that there was a conversation behind stage where somebody didn't recognize that it was Rick James. I was told later, I can't confirm this, but I was told that it was actually Beyonce that said something, didn't recognize that it was Rick James, didn't even know who Rick James was, and he was offended by it. And so she was obviously sitting out in the audience. Maybe it was Beyonce, whoever it was, he was clearly offended. And so he used the line from the Chappelle show, I'm Rick James, B. And there was a lot of people laughing, like a lot of people were laughing. Because they immediately made the connection, like they got it. It was hilarious. And then there was other people like, did you hear what he said? Like, oh my goodness, this is what has happened. What is going on? And like they didn't, you know what I mean? He made the assumption that his audience knew what he was talking about, but there were people who didn't know. And so they were taken aback. They were like blown away. They didn't know what to think. And you could see the look on half of their faces, but you could see the look on the other half, and like they were cracking up because they understood, right? So that is a way sometimes to help people understand that that's exactly why context is important. Because, or you'll be like those other people. What did he say? Oh my gosh! Did you just hear that? If you don't understand context, then you may not understand what's even being said or why it's being said. And so false teachers divorce the text from the context, which is why they're so effective at twisting the text, right? So we've got to help people understand more about context. Here's a good one. Is discernment an element of contextualization? So when I say discernment, and I guess it depends on what you mean by discernment. When I say discernment, when I think of biblical discernment, I think of a person's theological acuteness, their theological sharpness, their ability to determine truth, to determine truth in a message, to hear it, and to even discern not only truth in the text, but even be able to hear error in a message, right? Their discernment, their ability to distinguish the theology in the message. That's discernment. And the sharper that is, then the better, because it also helps you to be able to hear something, to know the difference between something that's right and almost right. And almost right and sounds about right is where most folk fall into error, Because most error it's not completely crazy and outlandish. It's just almost right. Sounds about right, kind of a deal. And thank you, dear brother. We appreciate that. Thank you, dear brother. Thank you, Chris. But that's a great question, Mike. Appreciate that. Let's see. Yep, there's one on rapture theology, one that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and again, dealing with Paul's approach, his use of apocalypticism in that, and just kind of really breaking down where rapture theology comes from and how it misreads the literary context and imposes a meaning that would have been foreign to Paul and Paul's audience. That's a great video. There you go. Awesome. In that series on eschatology. Yeah. Theological sharpness. There it is. There it is. What advice would you give a person who is preparing their first sermon? I would say sit down with your pastor. Write out your intention for the message. This is the whole reason that you're even preaching it, right? Write that out. What is the goal of this sermon? That way you know the teleos, the purpose of the sermon itself. What's the objective? What's the goal of the sermon? Then you want to write the MIT, the main idea of the text. This text that I've chosen, what's the main idea here? Create your outline, your points, and all of that, and go sit with your pastor, have him read it, have him critique it, rework it, bring it back to him again, and make sure that your pastor is satisfied with it. Don't get up and preach it, especially if it's your first sermon. I would recommend that all MITs, ministers in training, until you have taken some adequate, had some adequate theological education, especially as it relates to not only exegesis, but homiletics, in a way that satisfies your pastor's confidence in your ability to get up and do as they do in their presence and in their absence. I would say keep bringing all of your sermons to them in that way. So in that way, he can evaluate it for doctrinal content, theological orthodoxy, all of that stuff, and even give you some critique so that you don't spend a whole lot of time building out a point that you could have made 4 or 5 points by now, right? So you just need that. That is what I would say. And again, not just your first sermon, all of your sermons. Every time you get ready to preach, have that conversation. Make sure that you set up time with your pastor to go over your sermon. That's a great question. It's actually a great question. All right, so make sure now that these questions do have something to do with the topic tonight. All right, I'll mess with this one too, but just make sure the question is definitely related to the topic tonight. But a minstrel versus a musician. Again, a minstrel was that's an archaic English way of saying a musician. For some reason, some of these jokers think it's more biblical. It's King James is what it is. King James is an old English translation. It doesn't make it more biblical to say minstrel, because minstrel is not really even a biblical word. It's an English word. It's an old English word that nobody even uses today. Somehow people think that the more KJV-ish they sound, the more spiritual they sound, or the more prophetic they sound. So they'll be like, and thus the Lord is saying, and thither the Lord has sent me to you to say unto thee that he heareth thee. And listen, God ain't talking like that. You know what I'm saying? He's not talking like that. And, that in and of itself is probably a red flag to say that, yeah, this person ain't hearing from God anyway. But that's why that there's no distinction between minstrel and musician. A minstrel is a musician. It's just an archaic English word for musician, right? That no difference. So yeah. Let's see. So you guys is trying to back me back up into the KJV discussion. So I did a whole video on why we really need to start reading better English translations for clarity. The KJV does not give us the clarity that is needed for a modern reader, because so many words in the KJV are not even used, right? So let me just give you an example. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that, just to help you understand a little bit more. So I did a whole thing on it, and I want you to go read. So I think all right, the video has been put out. But let me just do this. This is something that I want to do. Hang on just a second. Just 1 second. All right. So again, so this is just something I want to do. Right? An almug. What is an almug? What is an algam? What is a chode? What is a gat? What is a habargion? What is a hosen? What is a cab? What is a lagur? What is a niseed? What is a ring straight? Wimples, ouches, cracknels. You know, what are these words? What do they actually mean? And yet I can go on and on and on, literally with hundreds of those words that are used in the King James, hundreds of them, right? So refer to the video, you know, in order to be able to understand what we mean by that. Let's see. Let's see here. Let's see here. All right. Any other questions? Did I miss anybody? Last one. Here we go. Last one. How do I not read myself into the text when I read scripture? I'm so used to hearing preachers do it that way. I'm still a bit lost on how not to do that. That goes right back to the topic of the video, is that we need to be contextualizing the writer, and as that is contextualizing who they are, because who they are is an important part of the text. So they're part of the context. Also, who they're talking about is a part of the context, right? And then, of course, if there's any possibility of us seeing what we call Christological value in it, how might this text point later to Christ? Well, there's enough people to be able to see in the text that's there. The writer, the authorial context, the people within the text, and then maybe the Christological context. There's enough folk in the text for us to be talking about them, right? Like the text is not lacking people. For us to throw ourselves in the text is already muddying the text, because we already know that the text was not about us. So we shouldn't even have to struggle to remove ourselves from a text that we're not in. What we should do is make every effort to consider who is important to this text. The writer is important to this text. God as the main character is important to this text. His son Jesus might be important to the text, especially if there is some Christological connection that is pointing to the gospel, is echoing somehow to the gospel. And then, of course, who are the main speakers in the text itself? So there's enough to consider already there that we don't have to consider, right? We don't have to put ourselves in the text. Having said that, there is a way that there might be some universal truths that we can draw out from the text. That is, what is true in this text for everybody at all times in all places, right? And in that way, the text can possibly be speaking to me, If it's a universal truth, then it's true at all times to all people in all places, right? But not every verse has universal truth to it. So again, Jeremiah 29:10 is referring to God's plan for Israel to bring them out of exile and put them back in the land. And so we always take the part that seems most hopeful, but we forget that this is his plan for them after having sent them into exile for their disobedience. So we don't consider that part when we try to make that verse apply. I know the thoughts and the plans. God knows the thoughts and the plans that he has for my life. Thoughts of peace and to bring me to, well, does God also have plans to send you into 70-year exile? Because unless you're reading that into your interpretation, then don't just take the part that sounds good. Take that whole other piece, as God told Isaiah, swallow the whole roll. Eat all that bad boy. If you're going to eat some of it, eat all of it. And the reality is that we can't take that because it was not written to us. It's not even for us. And the promise attached to that was specifically and particularly written to Israel on the basis of the circumstances that they were in, per God, who put them in that predicament as a result of their disobedience. You see, so coming out was a result of God sending them into the exile. And so that's a great question, B. Excellent question. There it is. Check out this video. What's wrong with the KJV? This is going to really help you out in terms of answering some of those questions that some of you may have had about, Bible translations, KJV, all of that stuff. And so we try to do that so that we're not always spending every live repeating things that we said from the last live or the last live or the live before that, when it's just go back and watch it. And then that way we're constantly moving forward with information in these lives. And would you do an open debate with Kyle Beverly on the KJV and it not being the final translation of the Bible? I really don't know who KL Beverly is and what that person's position on the KJV is. I don't know anything about him or her, their background. Again, I have no context for who this person is. But debating about the KJV for me is really a moot point, because anybody that wants to argue for the essentially KJV onlyism is already telling me that their capacity to reason is severely limited. Their capacity to reason and to consider information, to contextualize information is severely limited to whatever their fundamentalist group has taught them. And so for me, it's like arguing with the Black Hebrew Israelites. These are not people who appreciate critical thinking, right? If a person has no appreciation for facts and critical thinking, I just have no interest in debating them, because it's like talking to a wall and expecting a response, an intelligent response at that. So I don't know this person's position or what they believe, but if they're KJV only, not even interested, because this person is already, in my estimation, they're already limited in their knowledge of textual criticism, because nobody that has any healthy, sound, or how can I say, informed understanding of textual criticism would ever argue for KJV only kind of a thing, right? That's like people arguing about the letter J, and you're like, yeah, Jesus means earth pig, or hail Zeus. I listen, you ain't ever gonna catch me debating with a person holding that view, because that person is already so uninformed that it's just not even worth my time, right? Saying I want to debate. Now, if a person came to me with that question sincerely, hey, you know, I heard this, that, the other, yeah, I'll engage with them. But they actually wanted to debate that, well, that's telling me right there I'm already wasting my time, because I'm talking to somebody essentially with a second grade a kindergarten understanding of Greek, or not even of Greek, of just theology, of Bible, period. Like how am I going to communicate advanced information when that's the way that they're thinking? How am I even going to get through to a person whose thinking capacity is limited to ridiculousness? And they think I'm the one that has the problem. You see what I mean? Like, sometimes we got to know, like, leave some of these people alone. They're not even worth our time debating. That doesn't mean that I would not take on the subject for the sake of reaching other people who might encounter that position or be, you know, might stumble over some KJV onlyist kind of view. I might do something where I'm just talking about it to help equip them, right? But for the most part, to debate somebody about KJV only, I'm like, this person needs to get their chops up. They need to get their weight up, because if they're already thinking that way, that tells me all that I need to know about this person's exposure to textual criticism, their reasoning ability, their ability to think outside of group thinking. You know what I mean? Like, you can't come to a position of KJV only without really being part of a cult or a fundamentalist kind of group. It just, yeah, you know, like, who thinks that way? You know what I mean? But there's certain people who do. And you know, so again, watch the KJV only video. I mean, the KJV video that I do, and it will actually answer even some of those, that type question. Sheesh. You know, yeah, but it's you know, I understand the reason that he's saying that too. I definitely get it. Let's see what else we got. Anybody else? I think that's pretty much it. Again, you know, because we do the Q&A, the videos are longer than what they are, but the teaching is always up at the first part of the video. Like, share, so this might be able to help people. We are, we're nearing the 2-hour mark. We should have been done some time ago. But thanks again for joining this live tonight. We appreciate all of your support, all of you who have given, all of you who have subscribed, all of you who have joined as members. Continue to do it. Let's help UrbanLogia grow. If you've got some talent, some particular gift that you want to help with the mission and the work of UrbanLogia, reach out to me. So we've already heard from a few people, and we're looking forward to their contribution already. And if you want to volunteer to help further the mission and the ministry of UrbanLogia, reach out to me at info at UrbanLogia, or even Damon at UrbanLogia.org, and we'll love to hear from you. So thanks again for joining me tonight, and Lord willing, I will be back on tomorrow, and with another exciting topic in Jesus's name.